Commander Sarah Mitchell adjusted her civilian clothes one last time before stepping out of her rental car. The humid Hawaiian air hit her face as she walked toward Club Paradise, the popular night spot near Pearl Harbor, where off-duty servicemen frequently gathered. She had changed out of her naval uniform hours ago, trading the crisp whites and gold stripes for a simple black dress and comfortable flats. Tonight, she wasn't Commander Mitchell, the woman who oversaw Pacific Fleet operations from her secure office. Tonight, she was just Sarah, trying to unwind after 3 months of intense strategic planning sessions. The bass from the club's music system vibrated through the parking lot as she approached the entrance. Neon lights cast colorful shadows across the asphalt, and the sound of laughter and conversation spilled out each time someone opened the heavy glass doors. Sarah had been looking forward to this evening for weeks. Her assistant had recommended the place, saying it had excellent food and a relaxed atmosphere where military personnel could decompress without the usual formalities of base life. As she walked toward the entrance, Sarah noticed a group of young Marines gathered near the club's side patio. They were clearly off-duty, dressed in civilian clothes, their short haircuts and confident postures marking them as military, even without uniforms. She could hear fragments of their conversation carried on the warm evening breeze, typical talk about upcoming deployments, weekend plans, and good-natured ribbing between friends. The bouncer at the door, a large Samoan man with intricate tattoos covering his arms, nodded respectfully as he checked her identification. Inside, the club pulsed with energy. The main floor was packed with a mix of civilians and military personnel, all enjoying the Friday night atmosphere. Sarah made her way to the bar, ordering a simple gin and tonic before finding a quiet table near the windows overlooking the harbor. She had been sitting for maybe 10 minutes, watching the lights of ships in the distance and enjoying the relative anonymity, when she heard raised voices near the entrance. The group of Marines she had noticed outside was now inside, and they seemed to be having some kind of disagreement with the hostess about seating arrangements. The club was busy, and apparently there was a wait for tables. Sarah couldn't help but notice their frustration. These were young men, probably in their early 20s, who had likely just returned from a challenging deployment or were preparing for one. They deserved to blow off steam, and the delay was clearly testing their patience. One of them, a tall Marine with sandy hair, was becoming particularly animated in his discussion with the staff. As the situation escalated, Sarah watched the club's security team begin to take notice. The last thing these Marines needed was trouble with civilian authorities, which could easily escalate into military disciplinary action. She had seen too many promising careers derailed by poor decisions made during off-duty hours, usually involving alcohol and misunderstandings with local establishments. The sandy-haired Marine was now gesturing emphatically at the hostess, his voice rising above the music. His friends were trying to calm him down, but the situation was clearly spiraling. Sarah could see the bouncer starting to move in their direction, and she knew that once security got involved, the evening would end badly for everyone. Without really thinking about it, Sarah stood up from her table. Her years of command experience had taught her to recognize when intervention was necessary, and her instincts told her this was one of those moments. She walked purposefully toward the group, her mind already working on how to defuse the situation without revealing her position or embarrassing anyone involved. As she approached, she could hear the Marine more clearly. He was complaining about the wait time and suggesting that the club didn't respect military personnel. His friends were clearly embarrassed by his behavior, but they were also loyal to their fellow Marine and unwilling to abandon him. "Excuse me," Sarah said, stepping into the group with a calm but authoritative presence. "Is there a problem here?" The sandy-haired Marine turned toward her, his face flushed with frustration and alcohol. "Yeah, there's a problem. We've been waiting for over an hour, and they keep seating civilians ahead of us. We serve our country, and this is the thanks we get." Sarah could smell the alcohol on his breath and see the telltale signs of a young man who had started drinking before arriving at the club. This wasn't malicious behavior, just poor judgment amplified by frustration and alcohol. "I understand your frustration," she said calmly. "But maybe we can find a solution that works for everyone." The Marine looked her up and down, clearly not impressed by what he saw. To him, she was just another civilian, probably someone who had never served a day in her life and couldn't possibly understand what they were going through. "Listen, lady," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. You don't know what you're talking about. We risk our lives for people like you, and the least you could do is stay out of our business. His friends were now looking increasingly uncomfortable. They could see that their buddy was digging himself into a hole, but they weren't sure how to extract him without causing a scene. Sarah felt a familiar surge of the controlled anger that had served her well during tense military negotiations. But she also recognized that this was a teaching moment, an opportunity to help these young Marines understand something important about respect and assumptions. You're right, she said, her voice steady. I don't know everything about your situation, but I do know something about service, and I think we can work this out. The Marine laughed, but there was no humor in it. Oh, really? And what would you know about service? You look like you've never done anything harder than shop at the mall. The comment hung in the air, and Sarah could feel the attention of nearby patrons beginning to focus on their group. This was exactly the kind of public incident that could reflect poorly on the military, regardless of who was right or wrong. Before she could respond, the sandy-haired Marine made a decision that would change everything, apparently deciding that she was just another annoying civilian who needed to be put in her place. He placed his hands on her shoulders and gave her a firm shove, pushing her away from the group. Get lost, lady, he said loudly. This doesn't concern you. The shove wasn't violent, but it was deliberate and dismissive. Around them, other patrons stopped their conversations to stare. The bouncer, who had been watching the situation develop, immediately started moving toward them with purpose. Sarah stumbled slightly, but quickly regained her balance. The physical contact had crossed a line, transforming what had been a verbal disagreement into something more serious. She could feel her training kick in, the years of command experience that had taught her how to handle challenging personnel issues. The other Marines in the group immediately recognized that their friend had made a serious mistake. Putting hands on a civilian, especially a woman, was absolutely unacceptable behavior for a member of the military. They moved quickly to restrain their buddy, but the damage was already done. Whoa, 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 one of them said, grabbing the sandy-haired Marine's arm. That's enough, Rodriguez. You need to cool it right now. But Rodriguez was beyond listening to reason. The alcohol, the frustration, and now the adrenaline of the confrontation had combined to override his better judgment. No way, he said, shaking off his friend's grip. I'm tired of civilians thinking they can tell us what to do. We put our lives on the line for this country, and this is how we get treated? Sarah realized that the situation was now beyond simple de-escalation. The physical contact had made it a potential assault. And with witnesses around, there would likely be consequences regardless of how things proceeded from here. The bouncer arrived at that moment, his massive frame creating an immediate shift in the group's dynamics. Is there a problem here? He asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had dealt with countless similar situations. Rodriguez turned to face the bouncer, his chest puffed out in a display of bravado that Sarah recognized as the behavior of a young man who had never learned when to back down. Yeah, there's a problem, Rodriguez said. Your staff doesn't know how to treat Marines with respect, and now civilians think they can interfere in our business. The bouncer looked at Sarah, concern evident in his expression. Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need me to call the police? This was the moment Sarah had been dreading. She could easily end this situation by revealing who she was, but doing so would create an entirely different set of problems. These Marines were already in trouble for the physical altercation. Adding the knowledge that they had assaulted a senior naval officer would turn a disciplinary issue into a potential court-martial offense. I'm fine, she said carefully, but I think these gentlemen might benefit from some fresh air and a chance to reconsider their evening plans. Rodriguez laughed again, the sound harsh and mocking. Oh, great. Now she's trying to get us thrown out. Real classy lady. The bouncer's expression hardened. He had clearly seen enough to make his decision. All right. That's it. You gentlemen need to leave. Now, the other Marines immediately began apologizing and trying to escort Rodriguez toward the exit, but he wasn't ready to go quietly. This is bull, he said loudly, his voice carrying across the now quiet club. We serve our country, And this is how civilians treat us? This woman doesn't know the first thing about sacrifice or service, and she thinks she can tell us how to act? Sarah watched the young Marine with a mixture of sadness and professional concern. She had seen this before, young servicemen who confused their military service with a license for poor behavior. It was a dangerous mindset that often led to serious consequences, both for the individuals involved and for the military's reputation. As the group was escorted toward the exit, Rodriguez turned back toward Sarah one more time. "You know what, lady? Maybe you should try serving your country before you start lecturing people who actually do the job." Commander, with that parting shot, he allowed his friends to guide him out of the club, leaving Sarah standing near the bar with the bouncer and a crowd of curious onlookers. The bouncer turned to her again, his expression apologetic. "I'm really sorry about that, ma'am. Can I buy you a drink? Get you anything?" Sarah shook her head, though she appreciated the gesture. "Thank you. But I think I'm going to call it an early night." As she gathered her purse and prepared to leave, she couldn't help but think about the young Marine who had just made such a serious error in judgment. Rodriguez was clearly dealing with something, whether it was stress from deployment, personal issues, or simply the poor decision-making that sometimes came with youth and alcohol. What troubled her most was his assumption that she couldn't possibly understand military service or the sacrifices it required. It was a reminder of how isolated different parts of the military could become from each other, and how easily stereotypes and misconceptions could take root. The drive back to her hotel gave her time to process what had happened. In the morning, she would return to her office at Pearl Harbor, where she would resume her role overseeing Pacific Fleet operations. The irony wasn't lost on her that the young Marine who had dismissed her so casually was probably serving under her ultimate command authority. But tonight's incident also highlighted something important about leadership and the challenges facing modern military personnel. These young Marines were dealing with pressures and stressors that required understanding and guidance, not just punishment when things went wrong. As she pulled into the hotel parking lot, Sarah made a mental note to follow up on this incident through appropriate channels, not to pursue punishment for Rodriguez, but to ensure that he and his unit received the kind of leadership and support they clearly needed. The encounter had been unpleasant, but it had also been educational. Sometimes the most important lessons about command came from the most unexpected places, even from a confrontation in a civilian nightclub, where assumptions and reality collided in ways that no one could have predicted. The next morning arrived with the kind of brilliant Hawaiian sunshine that usually made Commander Sarah Mitchell grateful for her Pacific assignment. Today, however, as she sat in her office reviewing intelligence reports from the 7th Fleet, the events of the previous evening kept intruding on her concentration. The coffee in her ceramic Navy mug had grown cold as she replayed the encounter at Club Paradise, wondering if she had handled the situation correctly. Her office on the 14th floor of the Pacific Fleet headquarters building offered a commanding view of Pearl Harbor. From her window, she could see destroyers and cruisers moored at the piers, their gray hulls gleaming in the morning sun. Aircraft carriers dominated the distant horizon, floating cities of steel and technology that represented American naval power projection across the Pacific. It was a view that never failed to remind her of the enormous responsibility that came with her position. The secure phone on her desk buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. "Commander Mitchell," she answered, automatically shifting into her professional tone. "Ma'am, this is Master Sergeant Williams from the Marine Security Detachment. I have Lieutenant Colonel Barnes on the line. He says it's urgent regarding an incident involving his Marines last night." Sarah's stomach tightened. She had expected this call, but hoped it might not come. "Put him through, Sergeant." There was a brief pause, then the crisp voice of Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Barnes filled the line. Sarah knew Barnes by reputation, a decorated combat veteran who ran a tight unit and took the behavior of his Marines very seriously. "Commander Mitchell, I apologize for disturbing you so early, but I have a situation that requires immediate attention. 3 of my Marines were involved in an altercation at a civilian establishment last night, and I understand there was physical contact with a female civilian." Sarah listened carefully as Barnes outlined what he knew. The club's security had filed a report with the local police, who had in turn contacted the military police. The incident was being investigated as a potential assault, which could result in criminal charges as well as military disciplinary action. "Do you have the names of the Marines involved?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew at least one of them. Yes, ma'am. Lance Corporals Rodriguez, Johnson, and Patterson. Rodriguez appears to be the primary actor in the incident. He's been with us for 18 months, recently returned from deployment in the Philippines. Good Marine overall, but he's been dealing with some personal issues since his return. Sarah made notes as Barnes spoke. The picture he painted was familiar. A young serviceman struggling with the transition from deployment back to garrison life, possibly dealing with combat stress or personal problems that were affecting his judgment. What do you know about the civilian who was involved? She asked. Not much, ma'am. The police report identifies her only as a woman in her 30s who was trying to intervene in a dispute between the Marines and the club staff. She apparently left shortly after the incident and didn't file a complaint. But there were multiple witnesses. Sarah felt a moment of relief that her identity hadn't been discovered yet, followed immediately by concern about how to handle the situation ethically. As a senior officer, she had a responsibility to report her involvement. But she also didn't want to unnecessarily escalate the consequences for the young Marines. Colonel Barnes, she said carefully, I'd like to be kept informed of your investigation. This kind of incident reflects on all of us, and I want to make sure we handle it appropriately. Absolutely, ma'am. I'm planning to interview all 3 Marines this morning, and I'll be reviewing the security footage from the club. I should have a complete report by end of business today. After ending the call, Sarah sat back in her chair and considered her options. The ethical path was clear. She needed to report her involvement to her superior, Admiral Peterson, and let the investigation proceed normally. But she also recognized that her revelation could transform a relatively minor disciplinary matter into something much more serious. Her contemplation was interrupted by a knock on her door. Come in, she called. Captain Jennifer Walsh, her deputy for Pacific Operations, entered with a stack of briefing materials. Walsh was a sharp officer who had quickly earned Sarah's respect with her analytical skills and operational judgment. Morning, ma'am, Walsh said, setting the files on Sarah's desk. I have the updated intelligence summaries from our regional partners, and Admiral Peterson wants to see you at 1,100 for the weekly briefing. Sarah nodded, but her distracted expression must have been obvious because Walsh paused. Everything all right, Commander? You seem preoccupied. Sarah considered her response. Walsh was not only her deputy but also a trusted advisor who had helped navigate several complex personnel issues in the past. Jen, can you close the door? I need to run something by you. Walsh immediately moved to secure the office, her expression shifting to one of professional concern. What's going on? What's going on? Sarah outlined the previous night's events, being careful to stick to the facts without editorializing about Rodriguez's behavior or her own decisions. Walsh listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious as the story unfolded. So you were physically pushed by a Marine who had no idea who you are, Walsh summarized. And now his unit is investigating the incident as a potential assault. That's correct. And I'm trying to figure out how to handle this appropriately. Walsh was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking through the implications. Ma'am, you know you have to report this to Admiral Peterson. There's no way around it. But I think how you frame it could make a significant difference in how it's handled. What do you mean? Well, you could present it as a learning opportunity rather than a disciplinary crisis. This Rodriguez kid clearly has some issues that need addressing, but destroying his career might not be the best outcome for anyone. Maybe there's a way to use this as a teachable moment. Before Sarah could respond, her secure phone rang again. The caller ID showed Admiral Peterson's office. Commander Mitchell, the Admiral would like to see you immediately, his aide announced. He's in his office now. Sarah looked at Walsh, who raised her eyebrows in a silent question. I'll be right there, Sarah told the aide. The walk to Admiral Peterson's office took her through the heart of the Pacific Fleet headquarters, past conference rooms where staff officers were analyzing intelligence reports and planning operations that would affect American interests across the Pacific. The corridors buzzed with the quiet efficiency of a major military command. But Sarah barely noticed the familiar activity. Admiral Robert Peterson was a legendary figure in the Navy, a surface warfare officer who had commanded everything from destroyers to carrier battle groups during his 35-year career. His office reflected his personality, spare and professional, with only a few personal photos and his collection of ship models breaking the utilitarian atmosphere. "Sarah, come in and sit down," Peterson said, gesturing to the chairs arranged in front of his desk. His tone was neutral, which could mean anything. "Good morning, Admiral," she replied, settling into the chair and waiting for him to begin. Peterson leaned back in his chair, studying her with the penetrating gaze that had intimidated subordinates and foreign counterparts alike throughout his career. "I just received an interesting call from the shore patrol," he said. "Apparently, there was an incident last night involving Marines and a civilian woman at a local establishment. The woman's description matches you rather closely." 5. Thank you for watching. Thanks for watching. Sarah felt her heart rate increase, but she maintained her composure. "Yes, sir. I was planning to brief you on that this morning." Peterson nodded slowly. "I thought you might be. Tell me what happened." Sarah recounted the events of the previous evening, providing the same factual account she had given to Walsh. Peterson listened without comment, occasionally making notes on a pad. "And you didn't identify yourself to these Marines?" he asked when she finished. "No, sir. At the time, I thought it would escalate the situation unnecessarily. I was trying to de-escalate, not create a bigger problem." Peterson was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah, you've put us in an interesting position. On one hand, you were assaulted by a Marine under our overall command authority. On the other hand, your decision not to identify yourself potentially prevented a much larger incident." "Yes, sir. I realize the complexity of the situation." Peterson stood and walked to his window, looking out at the harbor. "The question now is how we handle this. We could pursue this through normal disciplinary channels, which would likely result in court-martial proceedings for assault on a senior officer. Or we could find a more constructive approach." "What kind of constructive approach, sir?" "Well," Peterson said, turning back to face her, "it seems to me that Lance Corporal Rodriguez and his friends could benefit from some education about respect, assumptions, and the chain of command. And you, Commander, are uniquely positioned to provide that education." Sarah began to understand where he was heading. "You want me to reveal my identity to them directly. I want you to think about what would be most beneficial for these young Marines and for the service overall. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from unexpected sources." The Admiral returned to his desk and pulled out a file folder. "I've been reviewing Rodriguez's record. He's actually a good Marine who's been struggling since his return from deployment. His squad leader reports that he's been having trouble adjusting to garrison life. And there are some personal issues involving his family back home." 7. Peterson handed her the file. "This isn't an excuse for his behavior, but it does provide some context. The question is whether we respond punitively or whether we try to help him become a better Marine." Sarah reviewed the file quickly. Rodriguez had enlisted straight out of high school in a small Texas town. He had deployed twice, first to Afghanistan and then to the Philippines. His performance evaluations were solid, and his squad leader's comments painted a picture of a dedicated Marine who had been struggling lately. "What exactly are you proposing, Admiral?" Peterson smiled for the first time since she had entered his office. "I'm proposing that you pay a visit to Lieutenant Colonel Barnes and his Marines. I think it would be educational for all concerned." 2 hours later, Sarah found herself driving across Pearl Harbor toward the Marine barracks. She had changed into her dress blue uniform, complete with all ribbons and insignia that clearly identified her rank and position. The gold stripes on her sleeves and the rows of decorations on her chest told the story of a career that had taken her from a young ensign to one of the Navy's most senior operational commanders. The Marine guard at the gate snapped to attention when he saw her approaching vehicle. "Good afternoon, Commander," he said crisply after checking her identification. "Colonel Barnes is expecting you in Building 7. The drive through the Marine compound gave Sarah a chance to observe the daily life of the unit. Marines in camouflage utilities were conducting physical training in one area, while others worked on vehicle maintenance nearby. It was a scene of disciplined military activity that reminded her of her own early days as a junior officer. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes was waiting for her outside his headquarters building, his bearing reflecting the professionalism she had expected from their phone conversation. He was a compact man in his early 40s, with the confident demeanor of someone who had led Marines in combat and earned their respect. "Commander Mitchell," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming over. I have to say, when Admiral Peterson called and suggested this meeting, I was intrigued." "It's an unusual situation, Colonel," Sarah replied. "But I think it might be beneficial for everyone involved." Barnes led her into his office, where 3 young Marines stood at rigid attention. Sarah recognized Rodriguez immediately. The sandy-haired Marine who had been so belligerent the night before. His 2 companions, presumably Johnson and Patterson, flanked him with expressions of nervous confusion. "Gentlemen," Barnes announced, "this is Commander Mitchell from Pacific Fleet Operations. I believe you encountered her last night at Club Paradise." The recognition dawned on Rodriguez's face like a slow sunrise. His eyes widened as he took in her uniform, her rank insignia, and the implications of her presence in his commanding officer's office. The color drained from his face as the full weight of his mistake became clear. "Lance Corporal Rodriguez," Sarah said, her voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "I believe you have something to say to me." Rodriguez's mouth opened and closed several times before any words came out. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Ma'am, I had no idea. I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm so sorry." The 2 other Marines looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. They had clearly realized that their friend's bad night had just become infinitely worse. Sarah studied Rodriguez for a moment, seeing not the arrogant young man from the night before, but a frightened Marine who had just learned a hard lesson about assumptions and consequences. "Lance Corporal," she said, "last night you told me that I didn't know anything about service or sacrifice. You assumed that because I was a civilian woman trying to help, I couldn't possibly understand what you and your fellow Marines go through. Is that correct?" "Yes, ma'am," Rodriguez replied, his voice stronger now but filled with remorse. "Tell me, Rodriguez, what do you think my job involves?" Rodriguez glanced at Colonel Barnes, then back at Sarah. "Ma'am, I don't know exactly. I oversee Pacific Fleet Operations, Lance Corporal. That means I help coordinate the movements and missions of every Navy and Marine unit in the Pacific region. When you deployed to the Philippines, the operational orders that sent you there crossed my desk. When your unit conducted training exercises, I was part of the planning process that made those exercises possible." She paused to let that sink in before continuing. "More importantly, when Marines like you are in harm's way, I'm one of the people working around the clock to make sure you have the support and resources you need to complete your mission and come home safely." Rodriguez was now visibly shaking, the full magnitude of his error becoming clear. "But here's what I want you to understand," Sarah continued, her voice softening slightly. "The problem last night wasn't that you disrespected me personally. The problem was that you made assumptions about someone based on their appearance and your own preconceptions. That kind of thinking is dangerous for a Marine. Armist." She moved closer to the 3 young men. "In your military career, you're going to encounter people who don't fit your expectations. Allies who don't look like you. Civilians who understand more than you think they do. Leaders who don't match your preconceptions. Your ability to recognize value and capability in unexpected places could literally be the difference between mission success and failure." Colonel Barnes stepped forward. "Commander Mitchell has agreed not to pursue formal charges for the physical contact last night. However, we are going to use this incident as a learning opportunity." Sarah nodded. "Lance Corporal Rodriguez, you and your friends are going to spend the next month working with Navy personnel on joint operations planning. You're going to see firsthand how different branches of the military work together, and you're going to learn about the complexity of the operations that support Marines in the field." She looked each of the young Marines in the eye. "You're also going to write a report on the importance of respect and professionalism in military-civilian relations, and you're going to present that report to your entire company." Rodriguez found his voice again. "Ma'am, thank you. Thank you for giving us this chance. I swear it won't happen again." "I hope not, Lance Corporal, because the Corps deserves better from you, and so do the people you're sworn to protect." As Sarah prepared to leave, she turned back to address all 3 Marines one final time. "Gentlemen, you took an oath to serve with honor, courage, and commitment. Last night, you forgot what those words mean. Use this experience to remember. The drive back to her office gave Sarah time to reflect on the morning's events. The confrontation had been necessary, but she took no satisfaction in Rodriguez's obvious distress. What mattered now was whether the young Marine would learn from his mistake and become a better leader as a result. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Captain Walsh. "How did it go?" Sarah smiled as she typed back. "Educational for everyone involved." That evening, as she sat in her quarters reviewing operational reports, Sarah received an unexpected email. It was from Lance Corporal Rodriguez, sent through official channels, with copies to his chain of command. "Commander Mitchell," the message began, "I know this email can't undo what happened last night, but I wanted you to know that I understand now how wrong I was. Not just about you, but about my responsibilities as a Marine. I've spent the day thinking about what you said, and I realize that I've been carrying around anger and assumptions that don't belong in uniform. I'm going to do better. Ma'am, thank you for giving me the chance to learn instead of just punishment. Semper Fi. Lance Corporal E. Rodriguez." Sarah read the message twice before filing it away. Tomorrow, Rodriguez would begin his month of additional training, learning about the complexity of military operations and the importance of respect in all circumstances. It wouldn't undo the incident at Club Paradise, but it might prevent future mistakes by him and others. As she turned off her office lights and prepared to leave for the day, Sarah felt satisfied that justice had been served in the best possible way. Sometimes the most powerful lessons came not from punishment, but from understanding the true consequences of our actions and the opportunities for growth that emerge from our mistakes. 3 weeks into his special assignment, Lance Corporal Eduardo Rodriguez sat in the Pacific Fleet Operations Center, surrounded by massive displays showing ship positions across thousands of miles of ocean. The room hummed with quiet intensity as Navy officers and enlisted personnel monitored communications, tracked weather patterns, and coordinated complex operations involving dozens of vessels and thousands of personnel. Rodriguez had spent the morning shadowing Lieutenant Commander Davis, a surface warfare officer who was responsible for coordinating logistics support for Marine units throughout the Pacific. What had started as what Rodriguez assumed would be punishment duty had evolved into something much more enlightening. "See this convoy here?" Davis pointed to a cluster of symbols on the main display. "Those are supply ships heading to support your buddies in the Philippines. The planning for that operation started 6 months ago and involves coordination between Navy logistics, Marine ground commanders, Air Force transport units, and civilian contractors in 3 different countries." Rodriguez studied the display, trying to comprehend the complexity of what he was seeing. Before this assignment, he had thought of military operations in terms of his own unit, his own mission, his own small piece of the larger puzzle. Now he was beginning to understand the enormous machinery that supported Marines in the field. "Sir, how do you keep track of all this?" he asked. Davis smiled. "Years of training and a lot of very smart people working together. But the key thing to understand is that every person in this operation, from the admiral down to the newest seaman, has a critical role. Respect and professionalism aren't just nice ideas. They're operational necessities." The lesson wasn't lost on Rodriguez. Over the past 3 weeks, he had worked with Navy personnel of all ranks and backgrounds. He had met petty officers who managed complex supply chains, young seamen who operated sophisticated communication equipment, and civilian contractors who provided critical technical support. His preconceptions about who was important and who deserved respect had been systematically dismantled. That afternoon, Rodriguez was scheduled to attend a briefing that Commander Mitchell was giving to a group of junior officers about Pacific Fleet operations. When he had first learned about this part of his assignment, he had been terrified. But now, after 3 weeks of intensive education about military cooperation and respect, he found himself genuinely interested in what she had to say. The briefing room was filled with Navy and Marine officers, most of them lieutenants and captains who were being groomed for higher responsibility. Rodriguez took a seat in the back, acutely aware that he was the most junior person in the room by several ranks. Commander Mitchell entered precisely on time, her bearing reflecting the confidence and authority that Rodriguez had completely failed to recognize at Club Paradise. She moved to the podium with the easy confidence of someone who had briefed everyone from admirals to foreign defense ministers. Good afternoon, she began. Today we're going to discuss integrated operations planning and the critical importance of understanding how different military specialties work together to achieve strategic objectives. For the next hour, Rodriguez listened as Commander Mitchell outlined the complexity of modern military operations. She spoke about the coordination required between different services, the importance of understanding cultural sensitivities when working with foreign partners, and the critical role that respect and professionalism played in building effective relationships. One of the biggest challenges we face, she said, is overcoming preconceptions and stereotypes that prevent us from recognizing capability and value in unexpected places. Military effectiveness depends on our ability to work with people who don't look like us, think like us, or share our background. Rodriguez felt as though she was speaking directly to him, though he knew the lecture was planned long before their encounter. Whether you're a Marine infantry officer working with Navy medical personnel, or a Navy logistics specialist coordinating with civilian contractors, your success depends on your ability to treat everyone with respect and recognize their contribution to the mission. After the briefing, Rodriguez approached Commander Mitchell as other officers filed out of the room. He had been preparing for this moment for days, knowing that he needed to have a more substantial conversation with her about what he had learned. "Ma'am," he said, standing at attention. "Lance Corporal Rodriguez reporting." "At ease, Rodriguez," she replied. "How has your assignment been going?" "Very educational, ma'am. I wanted to thank you again for giving me this opportunity instead of pursuing charges. I've learned things that I never would have understood otherwise." Commander Mitchell studied him for a moment. "What specifically have you learned?" Commander Mitchell. Rodriguez had thought carefully about how to answer this question. "Ma'am, I learned that I had no idea how much I didn't know. I thought military operations were about individual units doing their jobs, but I see now that it's really about thousands of people working together. And I learned that respect isn't just about rank or uniform. It's about recognizing that everyone has something valuable to contribute. And what are you going to do with that knowledge?" "I want to be a better Marine, ma'am. And when I get promoted, I want to make sure the Marines under my leadership understand what I understand now." Commander Mitchell nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what we hoped would happen. But your real test isn't here, Rodriguez. It's what you do when you're back with your unit, when no one is watching, when you're faced with situations that challenge your new understanding." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Colonel Barnes, who had come to check on Rodriguez's progress. The two officers stepped aside for a brief consultation, while Rodriguez waited nervously. "Commander Mitchell has been very pleased with your performance," Colonel Barnes told him when they returned. "She's recommended that you be given additional responsibilities when you return to your unit." Rodriguez felt a surge of pride mixed with determination. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." 2 days later, Rodriguez completed his special assignment and returned to his regular duties. But the Marine who walked back into the barracks was fundamentally different from the one who had left a month earlier. His squad leader, Sergeant Martinez, noticed the change immediately. "Rodriguez, you seem different. How was your time with the Navy?" "Eye-opening, Sergeant. I learned a lot about how things really work." Over the following weeks, Rodriguez's newfound understanding was put to the test repeatedly. When his unit worked with Navy medical personnel during a training exercise, he made sure his fellow Marines understood the importance of treating the medical staff with respect and professionalism. When they encountered civilian contractors on base, he set an example of courtesy and cooperation. The most significant test came 2 months later, when Rodriguez was promoted to corporal and given his own fire team to lead. His first leadership challenge involved a young Marine named Thompson, who had been having disciplinary problems and showed a disturbing tendency to make derogatory comments about other services and civilian personnel. Rodriguez recognized something of his former self in Thompson's attitude. The young Marine was clearly dealing with personal issues and expressing his frustration through inappropriate behavior and disrespectful comments. "Thompson," Rodriguez said during a private counseling session, "I need to tell you a story about a Marine who thought he knew everything and ended up learning the hard way that respect isn't optional in this corps." He told Thompson about the incident at Club Paradise, about his assumptions and mistakes, and about the education he had received as a result. He spoke about the complexity of military operations and the importance of recognizing value in unexpected places. You think civilians don't understand what we do? Rodriguez concluded. But I learned that some civilians understand it better than we do. I learned that respect isn't about rank or uniform. It's about recognizing that everyone has something valuable to contribute. Thompson listened with growing attention as Rodriguez described his month working with Navy personnel and the lessons he had learned about cooperation and professionalism. "Corporal, did you really push a Navy commander?" Thompson asked, incredulous. "I did," Rodriguez admitted. "And it was the dumbest thing I've ever done in my life. But it taught me something important about assumptions and consequences." The counseling session marked the beginning of Thompson's transformation, just as Rodriguez's encounter with Commander Mitchell had marked the beginning of his own growth as a leader. 6 months later, Rodriguez received orders for his next assignment, a deployment to Japan where he would serve as a liaison between Marine units and Navy logistics personnel. It was exactly the kind of assignment that would have terrified him before his education about joint operations and mutual respect. The night before his departure, he received an unexpected email from Commander Mitchell. She had been following his progress through reports from Colonel Barnes and wanted to congratulate him on his promotion and new assignment. "Corporal Rodriguez," the message read, "I've been hearing excellent things about your leadership and your work with junior Marines. Your ability to learn from difficult experiences and use them to help others is exactly what we need in our non-commissioned officers. Your deployment to Japan will give you opportunities to put your understanding of joint operations into practice on a larger scale. I'm confident you'll represent the Corps with honor. Fair winds and following seas." Rodriguez read the message several times, struck by the warmth and encouragement in her words. The woman he had so foolishly dismissed and disrespected had become one of his most important mentors, even though their direct interaction had been limited. On his final evening at Pearl Harbor, Rodriguez found himself back at Club Paradise, this time for a farewell gathering with his squad. The irony wasn't lost on him as he sat at the same bar where his transformation had begun almost a year earlier. As he watched his Marines interacting respectfully with the civilian staff and other patrons, Rodriguez reflected on how much had changed. The young man who had once made assumptions based on appearance and background had evolved into a leader who understood the value of diversity and the importance of treating everyone with dignity. His phone buzzed with a text from Thompson, who was now excelling in his role and had been selected for promotion ahead of his peers. "Thanks for the story about assumptions and respect, Corporal. It probably saved my career." Rodriguez smiled as he typed back, "Just remember it when you're leading Marines of your own." Later that evening, as Rodriguez walked back to his quarters for the last time, he passed the entrance where he had first encountered the group of civilians that had started his journey. He thought about Commander Mitchell, somewhere in the headquarters building, working late into the night to coordinate operations that would affect Marines like him around the world. The kid from Texas, who had enlisted thinking he understood what service meant, had learned that true understanding required humility, respect, and the willingness to recognize value in unexpected places. His encounter with a Navy commander in civilian clothes had taught him lessons that no classroom instruction could have provided. As he packed his gear for deployment to Japan, Rodriguez reflected on the profound changes in his perspective. He had learned that leadership wasn't about asserting dominance or demanding respect based on uniform or rank. Real leadership meant earning respect through competence, character, and the ability to bring out the best in others. The Marine Corps had given him many things: discipline, purpose, and brotherhood. But his encounter with Commander Mitchell had given him something equally valuable: the understanding that assumptions could be dangerous, that respect was earned, not demanded, and that the most important lessons often came from the most unexpected teachers. Years later, when Rodriguez had become a staff sergeant and was responsible for training young Marines, he would tell them the story of his encounter at Club Paradise. He would use it to teach them about assumptions, respect, and the importance of recognizing that everyone they met might have something valuable to teach them. The incident that had started as his greatest mistake had become his most valuable lesson, shaping not only his own career but the careers of the many Marines he would mentor throughout his service. And sometimes, late at night when he was reviewing reports from his subordinates or preparing for the next day's training, Rodriguez would think about Commander Mitchell and feel grateful for the lesson in humility that had changed the course of his life. The young Marine, who had once believed that respect was something he deserved simply for wearing the uniform, had learned that true respect was something he had to earn every day through his actions, his character, and his commitment to treating others with the dignity they deserved. It was a lesson that served him well throughout his career and made him the kind of leader the Marine Corps needed. One who understood that strength came not from dominating others, but from lifting them up and helping them reach their potential. In the end, the brief encounter between a Navy commander and a young Marine at a Hawaiian nightclub had ripple effects that neither could have predicted. It became a story about growth, redemption, and the transformative power of leadership that focuses on development rather than punishment. Most importantly, it demonstrated that sometimes the most powerful lessons come not from formal training or classroom instruction, but from real-world encounters that force us to confront our assumptions and grow beyond our limitations.